welcome back to AWS On Air. I'm not in the expo anymore. I'm now here with two very special guests, and I hope everybody's having a good time and is learning something today. So one of our very special heroes has been kind enough to join us. His name is Ben, and actually we were heroes. We were serverless heroes together, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
Before I came over to AWS, and he's joined by one of his coworkers named Luke. But Ben, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm Ben. As Farah mentioned, I'm an AWS Serverless Hero, so I work a lot in the serverless community, running the serverless meetup in London with some other people in the community, as well as helping to organize serverless days in London, and also now excitingly helping with serverless days in South Africa. I also run a consultancy called AWS, where we help people adopting serverless. So I end up saying serverless a lot of times, many times in sentences, and work on all of this stuff with Luke as well.
You don't seem busy at all. That doesn't seem like enough things to have on your plate.
Definitely not enough things at all.
All right, Luke, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yep. So I work at AWS with Ben. So I'm a tech lead. So ranging from a team of maybe 3 to 4 developers, we help large enterprises migrate to serverless, or we help greenfield projects, usually social media, maybe flights, maybe airlines, banking, all those sort of things, high scale. We help build serverless solutions. And I architect them and build them up, basically.
And do you say serverless a lot, too?
I say serverless, and then sometimes if there's some devs, teach serverless.
So I have a question for you. So I learned a couple names yesterday. So is it Big Ben, or do you call him Boss Ben?
I call him Big Ben or Benedict, one of the two.
An embarrassing revelation. There are multiple Bens in the company, and there are some email aliases that have been created that I did not know about.
Oh, I thought it was a fun fact to learn, and I had to use that today, you know. All right. So, Ben, can you tell us a little bit more about what being an AWS hero means to you?
Sure. I mean, I really just enjoy being part of such an amazing group of people, and quite humbled to be part of. Every time I'm with the heroes, I'm always feel like the odd one out. In fact, that everyone else is doing really amazing things. Every time at reInvent that we get time to spend together, or the Heroes Summits that happen, it's just really great to exchange ideas with the serverless heroes, but also container, data, community, all the different heroes together. It's really fun. And Farah organizes some really great events for us, which is always really nice. And the other part is helping sort of give feedback on the roadmap for some of the products and features at AWS, so getting access to look at backlog features and previews of things early on and help to give feedback around the documentation or maybe use cases for different technologies is really exciting. So yeah, I really enjoy being part of that community. Yeah,
it certainly is fun, and there's definitely like a good camaraderie that happens within, you know, folks in the group. So is this your first London summit?
No, I went to one last year, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, enjoying it. Super busy, super packed. You meet a ton of people. Yeah, always good fun.
Do you have a favorite thing that you want to do today, or is there something that's like high on your list that you want to make sure that you visit, or a talk that you want to see?
Yeah, the main ones in my mind, I'm really excited about observability and just like how we can best provide that for clients, but also for our teams to really understand what we're doing. So there's 2 talks throughout the day that I was really excited to see about observability.
Awesome. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the talks are great. The keynote was really great to see, and the focus on generative AI and AI in general was really fun. But for me, it's, again, meeting people. Lots of people have traveled here for the summit from the UK, but also from the US and all around Europe. And I always think the AWS Community Summits, they run an amazing after-event drinks, and it's really great just to see everyone from the different meetups around the UK and the different meetups around the world, and yeah, chat with people about serverless.
Yeah, networking is definitely the best part of these events, and getting to meet people and get to see people that you haven't seen in a long time, or maybe you put a face with a name. But okay, so Ben, you mentioned that you guys have been you've been in the serverless ecosystem for some time now. So can you think you shared briefly about what like AWS does, but can you dive into it a little bit more, and like what day-to-day looks like, and maybe what some projects that you might be working on that you can talk about?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we work as a consultancy helping people adopt serverless in particular. So a lot of what we do is building high-scale systems, which is really fun, and we use services like Lambda, DynamoDB, EventBridge, step functions, basically anything that has a serverless label. And we build really interesting services. At the minute, we're migrating an airline from on-premise all the way to serverless. Luke's done some really interesting work with startups building extremely high-scale systems. But the other aspect that comes with it is that serverless is still quite new, and a lot of companies, they want to adopt it, but they also need to build their capability to run these systems and continue to build with them. And finding serverless developers can be a little bit difficult. So a lot of what we do is help upskill serverless developers. So that is helping companies that have existing teams to reskill in serverless. And there are great courses and great certification and great programs out there. But one of the main things we do is just pair programs. So if we're working with a client to maybe build a new service or migrate part of their system, a lot of what we do is pair program with their engineers to help teach them serverless. Things like DynamoDB, single table design, these can all be a little bit daunting at the start. So a lot of what we do is training, but not not whiteboard training, but really hands-on delivery and pair programming to help upskill people in serverless.
Yeah, I feel like there has to be a continued motion throughout the life cycle of all this because things are always changing, right? There's always something new to learn in this ecosystem, I feel like. And I think we have a project or a demo that we're going to get to see today. Is that true? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
You want to talk a little bit about what you're going to show us today and then maybe dive in?
Yeah, very happy to. So across a lot of our different projects, we have a lot of best practices tailored for those clients, but also a lot of things that we want to teach either our internal devs that are coming onto it, and also the engineers we're working with. We're embedded into those teams we want to feel as one team. But a lot of them are moving to serverless for the first time or just have done things differently. What that's kind of led to us to learn and do is a really good, effective way of communicating. This is the constructs that we've built, mostly using CDK. This is the best practice we put in with them, and this is a justification why. We did a lot of trial and error as to what the best version of that is, but we've come to a solution that we think is quite nice in terms of explaining why we built the code, and I think that's often the hardest thing to do to someone just coming onto the project.
Awesome. We'll see it. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
While you're bringing that up, Luke, just a little bit more context. I think with these big projects like the airline and migrating, we're building out these platform teams that are building these constructs and baking in best practices. So it can be that one team that's working with infrastructure and security to bake in best practices using CDK, which is an infrastructure as code solution for building with AWS. We're building in these best practices. Teams are sort of using these CDK constructs like Lego blocks to build their architectures. But the understanding of why certain things have to be as they are and why certain things are whitelisted or why certain things are defaults, that bit sometimes gets lost. And we really don't want anyone to really be constrained and have a top-down approach where you just get an error message that says you can't do it. But instead, we're trying to find a path to educate people through the error messages that they get. And that's really the inspiration, as Luke was saying, for how we can try and close that gap between the best practice and the developer using the construct.
That's actually awesome. I think about like the very first time I had an error, and I remember I just sent it to to Chase, and I'm like, "What's wrong here?" You know, I just sent him a code snippet, and he's like, "I can't tell just by looking at it. I need to know what the error code is." But all right,
Cool.
Let's see some more about it.
Sure. If it's still showing. Yeah. This is basically a sort of small demo version of actually a wide variety of our different repos that we work across different projects. So let's assume I'm a new dev and I have joined this project, SLS Constructs. It's fairly small for the time being. It's got a few constructs that we created, some L2 plus ones based off of just a Lambda, really. And we've got a bunch of config for it. We'll go into the details of this, but we've kind of specified it into 3 different streams, sort of allowed config, required config, and default config, which we'll go to when I actually put up next to it. Say I've created this hello world Lambda. It's really simple, just returns hello world. But because we write our infrastructure as code, we've got our config here. And you can see some errors. We'll get into that. We've created this L2 plus construct and alias Lambda that just extends a Node.js function and has a bunch of different things. It checks our required properties, it checks config or defaults, and validates allowed properties. Let's put that there so we can just compare it. Okay. So we've created this construct here, and it's got a name, it's got architecture, it's got tracing, something's going wrong there, it's got an entry, just a handler, it's got a runtime and retry temps. So all of the information that we have here is relative to our config that we've created. This construct that we've created here, this Lambda one, has a bunch of different files associated with it, config, errors, index, Lambda, and types. And we specify a few different things. So we have a runtime that we allowed, either Node 18 or 16, architectures that allowed tracing or retry attempts. Those are the things that are allowed. Anything outside of that, we're saying, no, this isn't great. You're going to have to change this. This isn't a contract that we want to deploy. And that could be for context reasons, that could be for security reasons, that could be just for best practices. It really depends on the project. We have some required config that's saying things that are necessary for this contract to be deployed. And they also have defaults. So say I didn't put in a runtime here, it would default to Node 18. But going back to here, I've done something wrong. I've written this construct out, but I put the tracing as pass-through. And really simply here, the first thing that we could want to have is a dev, before they have to reach out and ask for help, they should be able to see in their code base what's going wrong and have visibility into that. And what you can see really clearly is the type of tracing pass-through is not assignable to tracing active. Okay, and that is coming from alias lambda props all the way pass-through, which actually comes from this allowed config that we've set up. So say I was to change this here to pass through, we'd see that error disappears it's all tied together. You can create those constructs and update them as your tech lead sort of wants to dictate. But let's go back here, set our things to active, and set our retry attempts. Somewhere in that range, let's say 2. That was great. That gave you in-time sort of errors. But the thing that isn't clear is I don't know why these things are erroring. I don't know why these things are best practices. I can't see why I can't have my retry attempts at 1,000. So that's one way we do things. And I wanted to show the 2 different ways we do things, because while it's nice to have it in the actually while you're coding, you lose a bit of information as it's just that type error. So instead, what I want to do is I've set it slightly differently for runtime. And say I've got a runtime here of Node.js 16. We've got our default here as 18. And what I've done is I've created some errors. These are just verbose messages that we want to send to our devs to explain why we've made the decisions that we can. And say we've got a warning here for a runtime. And if it's not the default, we try to explain why we have our defaults the way they are. So let's CDK synth. Okay, ignore my AWS credentials. Okay, so we've synthesized. Our stack's fine. But if we scroll up to the top, you can see quite clearly there's a warning message. Warning, consider using the default runtime for better compatibility and maintainability, and it's got a link. This link is documentation that we've created. We have it tied to GitHub pages, and on the repo that you're working on, you can click this link and it opens it up for you. This is just basic Docusaurus. You can see I didn't even want to change it just to show you how simple it is. And if we go to our documentation, we have a Lambda construct. Actually clicking on this link here. So directly from VS Code, we can actually just see that it takes us to the runtime and explains why our runtime should be Node 18, and you can write anything you want here. This is supposed to allow your devs to have complete autonomy over what they think their best practices are. Okay, so that's how warnings work, but we've synthesized. But say I've gone back and I've realized I don't actually want Node 16. I want Node 18. Only that. So I can update that. I can synthesize again. Cool. Okay, so this is actually throwing an error. We're not synthing. I've done something wrong. Okay, so
Was it an intentional thing that you did wrong, or no? I'm just kidding.
yeah. So yeah, I didn't realize that I'm only allowed Node 18, and it actually throws an error for me. And it says invalid runtime for Lambda function, allowed runtime to Node.js 18. And it has any link that we want. We've tied it back to this Node runtime error. And that's a lot of the large ways that we communicate. This is the best way we have our best practice and try to explain what we're doing. This message here can be very context dependent. Say you're working on a big enterprise bank and they only allow certain runtimes. And we want to explain that, even though we might not think it's necessarily bad to have that one. It's just a constraint that we work within. That's the sort of stuff we communicate here. And for a new dev that's joining the project, it's honestly a game changer having them there being like, oh, I can actually understand what's going on. It leads to a lot less time that your tech lead is spending just answering questions that people can find out themselves and give them that autonomy and power to create quickly. And we've actually seen a really big uptake in that.
And yeah, bringing it sort of back to the wider context of that big airline project I was talking about, multiple teams of the platform team building these predefined CDK constructs. Those teams are different teams that might not be talking to each other. So those teams might be working with security to define those and come to agreements, but that needs to get communicated to the 8, 9, 10 other teams. So this is really reducing the communication overhead of communicating the best practice between the teams, but also there's an ability to give feedback. So those streamlined teams, so those teams that are using the constructs, can give feedback back to that main team. And finally, the final piece we're doing as well is adding analytics in. So if some errors keep coming up, we can do specific trainings or actually go back and address, is this actually the right constraint if so many people keep hitting the error? But I think Luke showed how to do it in types, so it's instant feedback, how to do it as warnings, how to do it as errors, and the documentation around it. And we're kind of playing with different ways of doing it. The type-based errors give instant feedback that's really fast and helps speed up developers. Those error messages with the links to the more involved documentation are used for the things that are more protected inside of the code base, but also where we can go way more in depth. And it's a Docusaurus page, it's HTML, so we can embed conference talks that might be relevant, video explainers, Loom videos from the meetings that might have made the decision, architecture decision records, really anything can go in there and create that sort of complete feedback loop from idea, policy, error, all the way back around to learning and then understanding the context of the decision.
Yeah, that's really, really awesome.
Just, I can show one final thing, actually.
Yeah.
Is just that this documentation actually exists in the code base completely as well. It's all part of the same place that you as a developer can update something, write it in there. It's all just in docs, and we just have them as markdown. So all of our Lambda and the explanations that we need all exist in here. Like I said, you can embed anything.
So we version control the decisions that are being made.
Yep, exactly.
And again, when we link our ADRs in, then when we change our decisions, we also document that, which is nice.
Document everything. Isn't that the way?
Document
So
everything.
I know we're short on. We're getting close to the time, so I wanted to just kind of give you the stage again to say, if you had one, piece of feedback that you want to leave people with, what would that be?
That's a big question. I think we all want to have best practice security. We want to enable teams to work better. There is so much configuration now with cloud services that means it's quite an overhead, especially for new developers. What if you don't have a top-down approach to stopping people from working and blocking them, but have an education path? So actually they get excited to see a new error message because it's a new thing that they can learn and get better at and improve. And everything's changing so rapidly, as you said earlier, that all of us need to keep learning from a wide range of team members. And this has been the best way we've sort of closed the feedback loop on sort of developer productivity.
And what are you most excited for? Like with this, what's going to come up with this project or whatever else you guys are working on?
I think these rule sets vary by client and by context, but we are also working, we've open sourced this, but this is a very simple example of how the thing works. We're quite excited to open source a rule set that we think is the default rule set of best practices, and maybe release a couple of different ones. So startup, enterprise, multi-region, and then maybe under certain constraints like PCI DSS or GDPR.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you both joining us today. And I did drop a couple links in the chat if you want to learn more about Ben and the project. And stay tuned. We have a lot more learning and fun coming from you from the London Summit.